Part 1. The Girl Born for the Light. The Jewel of the Swat Valley. Our story begins in a place of almost unimaginable beauty, the Swat Valley of Pakistan. Picture snow-capped peaks piercing the bright blue sky, vast emerald orchards, and rivers that rush with the meltwater of glaciers. This valley was once called the Switzerland of the East, a place where natural splendor and ancient culture thrived. In this valley, on July 12, 1997, a baby girl was born to a family with a deep love for knowledge and literature. Her father, Malala Yousafzai, was a poet, a teacher, and an activist who ran his own local school. When Malala filled out the birth certificate, a relative whispered, "Don't give her a long name. It brings bad luck." But Malala, a man who saw no limit to his daughter's potential, named her Malala, after a famous Pashtun poetess and warrior who rallied her troops with courage. He named her for light and for battle. Malala grew up in her father's school. It wasn't just a place of lessons. It was her playground, her library, and her training ground. From a very young age, Malala understood that education was not a privilege, but a powerful weapon, the best weapon. While other children played with dolls, she was often found in the classroom, eager to learn. Her father would constantly tell her, "Malala, education is your light. Never let anyone dim it." Their life, however, was about to be profoundly interrupted. The shadow descends. Malala was around 10 years old when the beautiful Swat Valley began to change. The distant rumble of political instability turned into a dark cloud rolling over their home. Extremist groups, driven by a narrow, violent ideology, began to gain a terrifying foothold in the region. Initially, their presence was subtle, marked by broadcasts on illegal radio stations. These broadcasts soon became decrees, strict, unforgiving rules that dictated everything from men's beards to women's presence outside the home. The beautiful Swat Valley, so accustomed to freedom, began to shrink under the shadow of fear. The extremists targeted symbols of modernity and education. Among their first targets were schools, especially girls' schools. The logic was clear: silence the women, and you silence the future. Imagine being a child and watching your world dismantle around you. The sound of music was banned. Colorful clothing was forbidden. The vibrant life of the valley was slowly being extinguished. Malala's father, Malala, was one of the first to recognize the danger and speak out. He stood on public platforms, risking his life daily, to defend education and human rights. He often said, "In times of darkness, we must be the light." The doors close. The turning point came with an announcement that sent shockwaves through the Yousafzai household and the entire community. Girls' schools would be permanently shut down. For Malala, this was not just a news headline. It was an eviction notice from her own future. She was a brilliant student, eager to compete and learn, and suddenly, the path she had always walked, the path of knowledge, was blocked. The streets emptied. The fear became palpable. Malala and her friends started hiding their textbooks under their shawls, meeting in secret rooms for lessons, practicing their algebra and history in whispers. The act of reading became an act of rebellion. During this period, Malala's perspective shifted dramatically. The global events she had only read about in history books were now happening right outside her window. She didn't just understand freedom theoretically, she saw its immediate, brutal absence. This realization provided the first, deepest motivational drive, the knowledge that something precious had been stolen, and she had to fight to get it back. Finding a voice in the darkness. It was in this atmosphere of escalating terror that Malala found her first public platform. In late 2008, a correspondent from the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, in Urdu approached her father, looking for a student willing to keep an anonymous diary about life under the Taliban's rule. All the older students, understandably, were too afraid. But Malala, barely 11 years old, stepped forward. She saw it as an opportunity, a tiny pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness. Using the pseudonym Gul Makai, which means cornflower or centaurea in Pashto, Malala began to write. Her diary entries were simple, honest, and devastating. She wrote about her fear, the sadness of watching her uniform hang unused in the closet, and the sheer terror of hearing the sound of shelling nearby. One entry read, "I was too afraid to talk about the situation, but I want to speak now because they have closed our schools. I am scared, but I want to go to school." The blog became a sensation. People around the world were horrified and captivated by this brave, anonymous voice speaking from the heart of a crisis. Malala, still just a child, had become the unexpected, powerful narrator of her valley struggle. She was sharing a universal truth. Education is a basic human right, and courage is a quiet choice made every day. This marked the end of the beginning. The shy girl who loved her books was now stepping onto the world stage, armed with nothing but her words. The world was listening, and unfortunately, so were the very people she was writing about. The price of the pen and the global spotlight. The voice rises from the rubble. As Part 1 concluded, Malala, under the pseudonym Gul Mackay, was writing a secret diary that shocked the world with its candid account of life under the shadow of extremism. This period, from late 2008 into 2009, was the Valley's darkest hour. The extremists intensified their campaign, systematically destroying girls' schools. Over 400 buildings were reduced to rubble. Imagine the motivation needed simply to wake up and hold on to hope when every physical structure of your future is being demolished. For Malala and her father, this was a test of courage. They understood that the extremists could destroy the buildings, but they could not destroy the idea of education unless they allowed the fear to win. Then, in early 2009, the Pakistani military launched an operation against the militant groups in Swat. The fighting became intense, forcing thousands of families, including the Yousafzais, to flee their homes and become internally displaced persons, IDPs. This was another profound challenge, leaving behind everything they knew, including the fragile remnants of their school. Exile and revelation. For 3 months, Malala and her family lived as refugees, a time of profound uncertainty. It was during this period of exile that the anonymity of Gul Mackay began to dissolve. The international media, captivated by the story coming out of Swat, began to seek out the diary writer. When the family eventually returned to the valley after the military operation, Malala was no longer willing to hide. She had seen firsthand the cost of silence. Her father, Ziauddin, was immensely proud of her courage and supported her decision to step out of the shadow. Malala Yousafzai revealed herself as the author of the BBC diary. This revelation was the point of no return. Suddenly, Malala was no longer a secret blogger. She was the face of the resistance for education. She began to travel across Pakistan, giving interviews, meeting with political leaders, and addressing rallies. Her message was simple, clear, and immensely powerful. Education is our basic right. We must not be afraid to speak. International recognition and the rising threat. Malala's eloquence and bravery attracted immediate international attention. Documentary filmmakers captured her story, and global human rights organizations championed her cause. In 2011, she was nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize and was awarded Pakistan's first National Youth Peace Prize. The motivation driving her was not fame. It was the intense, burning desire to see her friends back in school. Yet, with every award, with every televised interview, the threat against her life grew more severe. She was speaking truth to power, a power that dealt in intimidation and violence. Malala was aware of the danger. Her family started taking precautions, but their commitment to the school and their cause kept them moving forward. For the English learner, this period highlights the use of rhetorical language, the art of using words to inspire action. Malala's words were sharp, not because they were hateful, but because they were morally undeniable. The day the music died, the extremists, having been pushed out by the military, watched Malala's growing influence with cold fury. They saw her as a direct challenge to their ideology, a poisonous symbol of Western ideals. A fatwa, religious edict, was issued against her. October 9, 2012, was a Tuesday. It was an ordinary school day. Malala, now 15, was riding the school bus home, surrounded by her friends. They were laughing, sharing notes, and doing the things normal teenagers do, an act of normalcy that, in Swat, had become a daring defiance. Suddenly, the bus was stopped. A young man with a beard and dark clothing, holding a pistol, boarded the bus and demanded to know, "Who is Malala?" The silence on the bus was absolute, thick with terror. Although Malala's face was partially covered by her veil, all eyes turned toward her. That moment, that collective silence, was perhaps the last instant of her childhood. The man raised the gun and fired 3 shots. One bullet hit Malala in the left side of her head, traveled down her neck, and lodged in her shoulder. 2 other girls were also wounded. The sudden, brutal attack was intended to silence her forever, to make an example of her courage, and to send a message that defiance would not be tolerated. The silence of the valley was broken by the sound of violence. The global reaction and the fight for life. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Malala was rushed to a local military hospital, where surgeons performed emergency surgery to remove the bullet. Her condition was critical. The world held its breath. The initial intent of the attack, to instill fear, failed spectacularly. Instead, the horrific act achieved the opposite. It globalized Malala's story. News of the shooting dominated international headlines. Political leaders from around the world condemned the attack, and vigils were held across continents. Realizing the need for specialized care, the Pakistani government arranged for Malala to be flown to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham, England. This move was a race against time, a desperate hope fueled by millions of prayers and the sheer determination of the medical teams. Malala was in a coma for several days. When she finally woke up in a strange hospital, thousands of miles from home, her first question was, "Where is my father?" Her recovery would be long and painful, requiring multiple surgeries to repair the damage to her skull and face. But the motivational story here is that the violence did not break her spirit. The bullet failed to hit the center of her brain. It only magnified her voice. The pen had been met with the gun, and the pen, through the collective action of the world, would ultimately win. Part 3. A New Life in Exile and the Launch of the Mission. Waking up in a new world. When Malala finally emerged from her medically induced coma in Birmingham, England, she was in a state of profound confusion. She was in a high-tech hospital room, surrounded by faces she didn't know, speaking a language she barely understood in a thick local accent. She had no memory of the attack, only the hazy recollection of the bus ride home. Her family was eventually reunited with her, but the trauma of displacement was immense. The reality was shocking. She had lost her home, her community, and nearly her life. Yet, even in this vulnerable state, her spirit was already fighting back. Doctors marveled at her resilience. Her physical recovery was a painstaking journey involving weeks of intense physical therapy, multiple complex surgeries to reconstruct her skull using a titanium plate, and dealing with nerve damage that affected the left side of her face. During her recovery, the world continued to pour out its support. Thousands of letters, gifts, and messages arrived at the hospital, including one from the UN Secretary-General. Malala realized that the attack, meant to silence her, had instead given her the loudest microphone imaginable. This realization was her greatest source of motivation. Her suffering had a purpose. Adaptation and education continues. Once stable enough, Malala and her family were granted residency in the UK. They settled in Birmingham, and Malala, despite the continuing medical appointments, insisted on returning to school. For an English learner, her experience in a new British school is a relatable narrative. She had to navigate a new curriculum, new social dynamics, and a completely new culture, all while dealing with the physical and psychological scars of the attack. This new school life was defined by 2 things: normalcy and notoriety. She desperately wanted to be a regular teenager, focused on her exams and homework, but she was constantly reminded that she was not. She was a global symbol, receiving police protection and dealing with a level of attention that most adults never experience. The profound motivational lesson from this period is resilience in the face of radical change. Malala did not allow the trauma to define her future. She focused on the concrete actions of her present, her math homework, her English essays, and her relationships with her family. The birth of the Malala Fund. The global outpouring of support quickly evolved into a powerful foundation. In early 2013, the Malala Fund was officially launched. The mission of the fund was simple but sweeping: to ensure every girl has the right to 12 years of safe, quality, free education. Malala's organization began campaigning and funding education projects, initially focusing on countries where girls face significant barriers to schooling, such as Nigeria, Kenya, Pakistan, and Lebanon, supporting Syrian refugees. Malala and her father transformed their personal crisis into a global movement. They understood that the most effective response to violence is organized, strategic action built around the principle that was attacked: education. The fund focused on advocacy, working with local partners and global leaders to change policies and funding flows. The 16th birthday speech, UN, 2013. Exactly 9 months after the shooting, on her 16th birthday, Malala delivered one of the most significant speeches of her life at the United Nations Youth Assembly in New York. This was her first major public address since the attack, and the world was watching. The power of her speech came from its incredible grace and lack of bitterness. She stood on the global stage, wearing a shawl that had belonged to the late Pakistani Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, and declared, "The terrorists thought that they would change my aims and stop my ambitions, but nothing changed in my life except this. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage was born." She emphasized that she did not speak for revenge, but for the right to education for every child. She made a specific, unforgettable point. She held no ill will towards the man who shot her. She said she had learned from Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., proving that her fight was purely ideological, armed only with books and pens. This speech became a global rallying cry. It firmly established Malala not as a victim, but as a fearless, compassionate global leader. She transformed her scars into her shield, and her story became a universal symbol of the power of the human spirit to transcend hate. The power of the pen. In the fall of 2013, her memoir, I Am Malala, was published. The book immediately became a worldwide bestseller. This act, writing her story for the world, was a continuation of the diary she started in secret. By sharing the full, unvarnished story of the Swat Valley, the culture she loved, and the terror she faced, she ensured that the reality of the fight for education could never be ignored. The proceeds from the book went directly to the Malala Fund, turning her written words into tangible support, funding schools, training teachers, and lobbying governments. Malala had successfully weaponized education against ignorance, proving that the pen truly is mightier than the sword. Her life in exile had not made her forget her home. It had simply made the entire world her classroom. Part 4. The youngest laureate and a voice for the world. History in the making. As we left Part 3, Malala Yousafzai had not only survived a horrific assassination attempt, but had also transformed her personal tragedy into a global platform for education. Her memoir, I Am Malala, resonated with millions, and the Malala Fund was actively campaigning and funding girls' education projects in some of the most challenging regions of the world. Then, on October 10, 2014, history was made. Malala, at just 17 years old, was jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize alongside Kailash Satyarthi, an Indian children's rights activist. Imagine receiving that call. Malala was in her chemistry class in Birmingham when her teacher pulled her out to deliver the news. Her initial reaction was, "Is it real?" It was undeniably real. She had become the youngest ever Nobel laureate, not just in the Peace Prize category, but in any Nobel Prize category. This award was a profound recognition not only of her personal bravery, but also of the universal importance of her cause. It sent a powerful message. The fight for education is a fight for peace. The global community had unequivocally sided with the pen over the gun. The Nobel speech, an unwavering message. When Malala stood to deliver her Nobel lecture in Oslo, Norway, she did so with her characteristic grace and conviction. She was no longer just speaking for the girls of Swat. She was speaking for the 66 million girls worldwide who were out of school. Her speech was a masterclass in humility and fierce determination. She began by acknowledging her simple beginnings. I am here with my brothers, my sisters, and my family, but I am not a lone voice. I am many. I am those 66 million girls who are out of school. I am those who are suffering from poverty, injustice, and lack of education. She spoke about the terror that had tried to silence her, but asserted that the weapons of love and hope were far more powerful. She reminded the world that the true fight was against ignorance, poverty, and terrorism, not against individuals. Her message was a direct call to action for world leaders. Why do world leaders send weapons, but not books? Why do they build tanks, but not schools? This Nobel Prize was not an end to her work, it was a turbocharge. It gave her an unprecedented platform and influence, which she immediately leveraged for the Malala Fund. For English learners, her Nobel speech is a brilliant example of persuasive rhetoric, using personal narrative to connect with a global audience and deliver a powerful call to action. A global citizen, still a student. Despite her global fame and monumental responsibilities, Malala remained fiercely committed to her own education. She returned to her Birmingham school, completed her A-levels, and in 2017, gained admission to the prestigious University of Oxford to study philosophy, politics, and economics. This commitment to her own learning was a core part of her message. She wasn't asking other girls to do something she wasn't doing herself. She showed that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong journey, regardless of your accolades or achievements. Her life at Oxford presented new challenges. She was still under security protection and had to navigate university life as arguably the most famous student on campus. Yet, she embraced it, cherishing the chance to engage in intellectual debate and the relative anonymity of student life compared to her public persona. This phase of her life is a powerful motivator for anyone striving for higher education, showing that despite immense pressure, personal growth and learning remain paramount. Continued advocacy and direct impact. The Malala Fund, fueled by the Nobel recognition and the success of her book, expanded its reach dramatically. Malala herself traveled extensively, visiting refugee camps, schools in conflict zones, and meeting with girls who, like her, faced immense barriers to education. She went to Nigeria to meet girls who had escaped Boko Haram. She visited Lebanon and Jordan to speak with Syrian refugee girls yearning for classrooms. She returned to Pakistan, cautiously, to visit her home in Swat, a deeply emotional experience that solidified her connection to her roots. Each visit, each meeting, reinforced her conviction. One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Her organization focused on breaking down specific barriers: child marriage, gender discrimination, war, and poverty. The fund invested directly in local education advocates and programs, empowering communities to find their own solutions. Malala's work highlighted that girls' education is not just about human rights. It's about global development, economic prosperity, and peace. Educated girls lead healthier lives, have smaller, healthier families, and are more likely to participate in their economies and politics, creating a ripple effect that benefits entire societies. She became a living testament to the power of a single voice amplifying millions. Part 5. Beyond the Bullet, a Future Forged. The completion of the journey. As we enter the final chapter of Malala's story, the girl who was nearly silenced in a school bus is now completing her studies at one of the world's most prestigious universities. This transition, from Nobel laureate to university graduate, is perhaps the most powerful testament to her unwavering belief in the power of education. In 2020, Malala Yousafzai graduated from the University of Oxford with a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, PP. This was a monumental victory, not just for her, but for every girl in the world told that her education didn't matter. She had achieved the very goal the extremists had tried to destroy. Her cap and gown symbolized more than a degree. They symbolized the triumph of knowledge over ignorance. Her graduation was a crucial turning point. Having successfully navigated the dual worlds of global activism and demanding academics, she was now ready to dedicate her full energy to the Malala Fund and to shaping her own future. Redefining the mission. With the immediate goals of survival and education complete, Malala's focus shifted from advocacy to direct impact and global policy. The Malala Fund began to emphasize sustainable change, focusing on 1. Local leadership, empowering women activists and educators in developing nations to lead change in their own communities, recognizing that local solutions are the most effective. 2. Digital education, investing in innovative solutions, including digital and distance learning, to reach girls in conflict zones or remote areas where physical schools are too dangerous or inaccessible. 3. Policy change, working directly with international bodies, G7/G20 leaders, and governments to ensure that education is prioritized in aid and development budgets. Malala recognized that while her voice was essential, The long-term success of the mission relied on building a pipeline of future female leaders. She often used her public appearances to share the stage with young women activists from countries like Afghanistan, Ethiopia, and Brazil, ensuring that the world heard their diverse and urgent voices. The personal journey continues. Malala's story is not just one of global triumph, but of profound personal growth. In 2021, she announced her marriage to Asser Malik. This personal decision was significant, representing her ability to build a normal, loving life despite her traumatic history. It also sparked global conversations about the choices of young Muslim women, and Malala used the discussion to advocate for the personal freedom of choice in all aspects of women's lives. Her willingness to share her personal life showed the world that a global activist can also be a multifaceted, happy individual. It demonstrated that courage and conviction do not demand the sacrifice of personal happiness or normalcy. A powerful motivational lesson for all who balance activism, career, and personal life. The unstoppable legacy. Today, Malala Yousafzai stands as a timeless symbol of youth power and resilience. Her story teaches English learners and global citizens alike several profound motivational lessons. The power of one voice, one child, with moral clarity, can confront the most violent and repressive forces and win. The ultimate weapon is education. Knowledge is the only tool that cannot be taken away and that fundamentally changes the trajectory of a life and a nation. Resilience is a choice. The true measure of courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to speak and act despite it. Action triumphs over bitterness. Malala chose compassion over revenge, proving that the strongest response to hate is constructive action built on love and hope. The Malala Fund continues its vital work, carrying forward the message that originated in the beautiful, besieged Swat Valley. Malala's legacy is not just the memory of her bravery on a bus. It is the millions of girls currently in school because her voice, though targeted, was never truly silenced. She completed her journey and then dedicated her life to ensuring every other girl has the chance to complete hers. You have now completed the entire 5-part motivational story of Malala Yousafzai. Thank you for following her incredible journey. Subscribe to this channel now to make this story and its lessons a permanent part of your daily motivation and English learning.